Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. When my grandparents passed away several years ago, they left their modest farmhouse and surrounding land to me in their will. I was stunned and grateful for this unexpected gift. The property held fond childhood memories for me, like feeding the chickens, picking apples in the small orchard, and running through the open fields. After the funeral, I made the 5-hour drive out to the rural area to see my new inheritance. The old farmhouse looked sadly neglected, with peeling paint and overgrown bushes, but the charm was still there. I walked the perimeter of the 20 acres, picturing future projects and improvements. This could be an amazing retreat from city life. Over the next year, I poured my spare time and savings into restoring the property. I fixed up the farmhouse, cleared brush, repaired fences, and planted new trees. Watching it come back to life with my own hands was incredibly rewarding. About a year after starting the renovations, I was ready to make the big move. I put my downtown apartment up for sale, packed my bags, and headed out to start my new life on the farm. After living there peacefully for several months, I noticed some survey stakes had been placed along the back edge of my property. This struck me as odd. Why would someone be surveying my clearly defined land? The next weekend, a backhoe rumbled up my long driveway, followed by a shiny black pickup truck. A gruff, overall-clad man stepped out and announced, "We'll be excavating for the new septic tank today." "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake," I replied, confused. "I didn't hire anyone to install a septic tank." The man gestured towards the back boundary line. "Your new neighbor hired us. Since the leach field runs onto your property too, we gotta dig back here." I looked where he pointed and saw a foundation neatly laid out on the adjacent lot, which I knew from my grandparents' records to be unowned woodlands. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," I said firmly. "That land belongs to me, not any new neighbor. There must be some mistake with the property boundaries." The excavator hesitated, clearly uncertain how to proceed. Just then the black truck door swung open, and a large-bellied, white-haired man stomped towards us. "What's the damn holdup?" he shouted. "We're burning daylight here." I squared my shoulders and tried to remain polite but firm. "Pardon me, but I believe you may be mistaken about the boundaries. This is my family's land, which I inherited. I'm not sure who told you could build here, but this survey seems inaccurate." The white-haired man glared at me. "And who the hell are you?" I introduced myself calmly and explained the property history. The man scowled deeper. "That's a crock," he bellowed. "I just bought this land fair and square last month. Been planning this retirement home for years, and I won't have some know-nothing youngster messing it all up." We went back and forth, both of us convinced we were right. But neither could produce official documentation proving it. He did have a hand-drawn plat map from the person he bought it from, showing the 20 acres as part of his parcel. I pointed out this crude drawing was not legally binding. Frustrated, he leapt into his truck and peeled out, yelling that he would sort this all out. The excavator shrugged, loaded up his equipment, and drove off too. Over the next few weeks, I pored over my grandparents' old survey maps, property records, and my own deed. All clearly showed the 20 acres as belonging to our family. I even hired my own surveyor to restake the corners, just to be certain. Meanwhile, the aggressive neighbor continued building his retirement home right up to the disputed boundary line. He even had the audacity to pave a driveway extending right onto my front lawn. Fed up with his trespassing, I had my lawyer send a cease and desist letter, insisting he stop construction immediately, pending a legal decision on the land rights. I hoped he would come to his senses once he realized I was serious. But instead, he sent his own lawyer's letter the next day, insisting he was well within his rights on his land and threatening to sue me for harassment if I continued interfering with his builders. I was stunned by his stubborn refusal to reconsider his position, but I wasn't about to back down on land that was rightfully mine. After consulting my attorney, I decided to file a civil lawsuit requesting the court clearly establish rights to the disputed 20 acres. I also asked that the judge order immediate halt to any construction on the contested parcel until the case could be heard. Given the extensive documentation proving my family's ownership, I felt confident the court would rule in my favor, but neighbors can sure be obstinate, as I was learning. The next week, a sheriff's deputy arrived and served me papers. My neighbor was suing me for trespassing. I could hardly believe it. He was claiming I had repeatedly and willfully trespassed on his land. Said I caused emotional distress to him and his poor wife, who couldn't bear to see a violent young hooligan on their idyllic country property. He wanted $20,000 in damages plus court orders keeping me far off his land. My blood boiled reading his absurd accusations. He was the one encroaching on my property. I had half a mind to march right over there and give that old curmudgeon a piece of my mind. But my lawyer convinced me the high road was better. We prepared a detailed rebuttal along with a counterclaim reiterating my original suit. The day of our preliminary court hearing finally arrived. I put on my best suit, gathered up my neatly organized evidence binders, and headed to the courthouse, butterflies swirling in my stomach. I sat at the plaintiff's table with my attorney. Moments later, the old man stormed in wearing muddy cowboy boots, ratty jeans, and a wrinkled flannel shirt. He plopped down at the other table and pointedly turned his back on me. The judge summarized both sides' claims for the record. Then he looked squarely at me first. "Make your case," he said. I stood, took a deep breath, and launched into the speech my lawyer and I had rehearsed. I described the property history in detail, from my great-grandfather buying the land in 1932 to my inheriting it from my grandparents 6 years ago. I presented old surveys, tax records, deeds, and my newly commissioned survey to prove its boundaries. I shared my renovation efforts to show I was not absentee, but rather a hands-on owner caring deeply for the land. The judge nodded thoughtfully and jotted notes. He turned his gaze to my disheveled neighbor. "Your evidence?" My neighbor pulled out his crude, hand-drawn plat map again, insisting the person he bought the land from assured him the 20 acres was included. He produced no other documentation. He went on a tirade about me trespassing and harassing his poor family, who, in truth, I had never met. Finally, the judge held up his hand for silence. He then delivered his ruling. Given the overwhelming evidence, I was the rightful owner of the disputed 20 acres. My neighbor was ordered to immediately cease construction pending final outcome of the boundary dispute. Trial would commence in 6 weeks, when a jury could make the final ruling. I breathed a huge sigh of relief. As we left court, I overheard my neighbor yelling at his lawyer, demanding he hurry up and fix this. I just shook my head. Some people just won't quit. Over the ensuing weeks, my patience wore thin as my neighbor continued to trespass, cut trees, bore a well, and even erect a small barn on my property. I documented every incident carefully with photos and video. On trial day, I again laid out my evidence, proving ownership of the 20 acres. The jury reviewed all the documents and walked the land, seeing the boundary markers for themselves. My neighbor took the stand and actually perjured himself, swearing he had surveyed the land extensively before purchasing, though no records existed. He falsely claimed my grandparents were old and confused when they deeded me the 20 acres. They were fully competent when they had the land legally transferred into my name. His barefaced lies clearly angered the jury. After just 2 hours of deliberation, they returned with their verdict. The 20 acres unambiguously belonged to me. The judge not only ordered my neighbor to vacate the contested land and remove all his improvements, but also to pay punitive damages for his defiance of the initial cease and desist order. Not wanting any further dealings with this hostile man, I simply requested $5,000 in damages, which the court granted. Finally, this boundary dispute was resolved fully in my favor. Justice prevailed because I remained calm, presented facts truthfully, and did not sink to my neighbor's abrasive tactics. Soon after, a for sale sign appeared on my opponent's remaining land. Seems this country living didn't suit the trespasser after all. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Please allow me to note well in advance, this story is not mine. In fact, it's a rather popular story in a town I once lived in, Savannah, Georgia, and centers around one homeowner who got royally annoyed with a movie producer. There will be a note at the end about the fellow this story is about, for those interested. Okay, so first and foremost, when movie producers are looking for places to set a movie that takes place in colonial or even 1800s cities in the US, due to the sheer number of parks, wide roads, and period houses, they will often select Savannah, Georgia. They'll pull all the Spanish moss out of the trees or trim it back, pour dirt on the roads around the squares, and effectively backdate that part of the city to fit most any place, even up to some having used the area as a setting for places like early Washington, D.C., and even places in Britain or France. Typically, when producers do this, They will pay each homeowner whose house is used as background flavor a couple of $1,000s for the licensing to do so. That will be important later, trust me. They issue some rules, like no electric lights being visible, not coming out of any door that faces the street, and you have to move your automobiles away from the drive, if you have a drive. Well, in 1979, a producer came from Hollywood with the intention of using Savannah for that very purpose. Specifically, the producer was from one of the big three-letter TV channels and was working on making a made-for-TV movie talking about the events after the assassination of Lincoln and the subsequent accusations of the doctor present at his death. The production went to the city to seek permission and then sent an announcement out to each of the homeowners telling them of the various days that the shoot was going to take place. However, much to their downfall, they also noted that the production company would not be compensating the homeowners for the use of their homes as backdrops. This was met with some great annoyance by the homeowners, who turned to the city for help, only to be told that it was their civic duty to allow the use of their homes. Most everyone agreed to this and bit their lips. One homeowner, however, didn't. He decided to get revenge on the production, attempting to screw up their shooting every chance he got. He first started by leaving his car out in front of his house, only to have it towed before filming started. He threatened legal action against the studio, but that fell on deaf ears. He forbade the use of his home in some of the shots, but the production company got the city to make him back down. Eventually, enough was enough, so he waited, biding his time until he was certain they were filming. When the day came that his house was being used as a background shot, the homeowner grabbed a massive Nazi flag and hung it out front of the house out of one of the top windows. The production company balked. They knew that this ruined any shot they'd used there, and what's more, they started to question just when he'd put the flag up. Was it just the one day, or had all the previous shots, some which showed the house from across the square, been ruined as well? They turned to the city for help, and the city just basically shrugged, saying that it was his First Amendment right to do that, and implied that had the production company paid the homeowners, as had always been done before, then this probably wouldn't have happened. In the end, the production company had to end shooting and go to the homeowner, begging for him to remove the offending flag. He did eventually do so, but only after his lawyer got a contract in writing that required the production company to pay all the homeowners for having their homes in the shot. The flag came down, and shooting wrapped in less than a day. Interestingly, it's said that in the movie in question, The Ordeal of Dr. Mudd, there are several shots where you can see a bright red Nazi flag flying from one of the homes in the distance. That stunt cost a producer quite a substantial amount of money, and pushed production back at least a year, while they tried to find every single instance that the flag flew in the background shots. This homeowner would go on to himself become very famous, though not for a good reason. Even so, he lives on among the legends of that city, both for his revenge against a movie producer and his later brush with fame. The next one is a petty revenge story. It all started when I was picking up my daughter from school. I parked on the street with the driver's side of the car on the street side and the passenger side near the sidewalk. Important. The kid I was picking up has her car seat behind the driver's seat, so I had to stand in the street to buckle her in. Then I opened the driver's door, got in, and reached for the door to close it. I had almost closed it. It was only a little ajar, when a Honda Civic plowed into it so hard that the door sliced into the Civic's bumper. The other driver backed up until I could fully open my door again, and I saw the Civic was maybe 8 inches from my car. Who drives so close to parked cars? Usually I would just exchange info and that would be it, but the guy gets out and has a huge attitude. He starts lecturing me, saying I need to look around before opening my door and that he had no time to react. If I had taken more time to get in, he would have hit me. He definitely could have avoided me. The street is not narrow, and there is not even a sidewalk on the other side. Plenty of room. We start to exchange information, and I think I smell alcohol on his breath. My husband soon arrives with our other daughter because I called and let him know what happened. The guy tries to give my husband the whole women drivers am I right spiel, and my husband verbally tears him a new a-hole. My husband confirms he also smelled alcohol, so we call the cops. The other guy is super for it. He wants the cops called and wants to talk to them. Cool. My girls are running around the schoolyard as each of us gives our statements. Mine is pretty cut and dry, so soon husband and I are just standing around while the cops talk to the driver of the Civic. Not long after, we overhear him fail the breathalyzer. So he gets arrested, and I'm driving a rental until we see if my car can be fixed. The next one is a malicious compliance story. It's a tale as old as capitalism. My job, which to be fair I freaking adore working at and am so grateful for and happy at, requires a doctor's note because I've been sick and working from home for 2 days. Now, I haven't just had a minor cold or flu. Several days ago, I came down with the worst cold flu symptoms you can imagine, and then things starting going downhill from there. It got to the point where I have now been to the ER 2 days in a row because of tonsillitis and excruciating pain brought on by swallowing tiny sips of water. It's not great, and despite a whole battery of swabs and tests, the doctors don't know what the underlying bacteria or virus causing these symptoms is. Obviously, there's no way in hell I want to infect my coworkers with this plague, so I told HR that I would be working from home until I'm feeling better, since my job can be done 100% remotely. They hit me back with the ever-famous, if you need to work from home for more than 2 days in a week, you'll need a doctor's note since it's against policy. My first instinct was to just go into work looking, sounding, and feeling like death warmed up. But A, I don't want to infect my colleagues, and B, I legitimately believe that I would pass out on my walk to work, and would have to be taken to the hospital yet again. Instead, I spoke to the ER doctor from earlier this evening, my second visit in as many days. I asked him how long he thought I should stay away from work/work from home, and then told him I needed a note so I could stay home. He had a brief flash of vaguely furious, "What the duck?" cross his face at the odds that my job would force someone as sick as I am to come in and risk the health of those around me, then assured me he would write the note. I was thinking it would just be a basic, Lulu Gingerspice should continue to work from home until the end of the week. Nah, bro, came through for me. He wrote a note saying that I should be off of work for at minimum another week, then added the piece de resistance as his last line. Infectious disease requires more time than 2 days to improve. The next one is an entitled people story. So, around the beginning of the pandemic, I landed a job at a well-known U.S. fast food chain. The GM, general manager, was a tall, stocky, bald guy. He really liked my interview, so from the beginning, he told me that he hired me with the intention of making me a manager someday soon. So I busted my butt every day, proving my worth, often doing the work of a full staff, around 7-8 people, all by myself. I worked this hard because my previous job had just laid me off due to the effects of the pandemic on the hospitality industry, canceled vacations and so on, and so I was just happy to have a job. In order to become a manager, you had to take the ServSafe exam. Usually you'd get promoted whether or not you passed the exam, but per state law there was always to be a ServSafe certified manager on duty at all shifts. Given that there were so few of us, 3 including myself and the GM, that ServSafe cert was invaluable, but I'm getting ahead of myself. One day in the middle of my shift, the GM approaches me with a book to study for my certification. I'm excited because I know that this means a promotion and a significant pay raise. I study this book like my life depends on it, with every free moment that I get throughout the day spent in the book. I'm a quick study and I progress really well through the book, but there is one major issue. The more I read, the more I discover that there were so many health violations happening at the workplace. A lot of these fast food workers aren't paid enough to care about cleanliness. Most places will be okay with the appearance of cleanliness. I mean, improper food storage, cross-contamination, changing the dates on expired products, just to name a few. We even had minors, 16, 17, working in the kitchen. I decided to approach the GM about my concerns, hoping that we could get to work on fixing a few things. Instead, I met with him snarling back at me. Just do what I say. I am shocked. Then, he begins to make my life as miserable as he can. He would intentionally short-staff the shifts that I worked because he knew that I wouldn't complain about doing extra work. And then when our numbers suffered because there were literally 3 of us doing the work of 7, 8 people, he would bark at me at the beginning of the next shift in the presence of my coworkers. He went in deep, calling me worthless and all types of names just to degrade me. He would normally threaten my job about 2, 3 times during a shift. I actually began to gaslight myself into believing that I was in the wrong and to just work harder. It didn't really click that I wasn't doing anything wrong until one day when I stopped by during the morning shift, I worked nights, to check on something, and I noticed the morning manager clock in, then go back outside to smoke and have breakfast. I was so shocked because no one said anything. I approached one of the morning guys that I knew I could trust and asked him if this was a normal occurrence. He said yes, along with so many other things that this female manager got away with that I would probably be fired on the spot for. During this entire fiasco, after many breakdowns where I would go to the freezer to cry, I did it. I passed the ServSafe exam. I was very proud of myself. If my life was miserable before, I don't have the words to begin to describe what my life became after getting certified. Apparently, and I have no way of verifying this, the GM became threatened by me and intensified my misery. I forgot to mention that in an attempt to save money so his numbers looked good, he would literally make some workers work days for free. Let me explain. I noticed that some employees would work double 5 days a week and get paid the exact same as the workers who work normal hours. People, listen to me. Hard work is rarely, if at all, rewarded in the US. This man would manipulate the time clocks to essentially force some of the more gullible employees to work overtime and only get paid for 40 hours. I kid you not, there was this young girl, fresh out of high school, who would somehow manage to work 70+ hours a week and only be paid for 40. She somehow thought this was normal. Here's the kicker. While he was manipulating the clocks and abusing some of these kids, he would always be on the clock even when he'd left for the day. One day, I had the audacity to clock him out because he wasn't in. This man gave me the tongue lashing of a lifetime the next time he saw me. Now comes the karma, and it was sweet. The thing about cosmic justice is that it has a sense of humor and irony. I specifically remember that in one of my GM's tirades, he would tell me that I would be coming in here as just a customer and not an employee at some point. Keep this in mind because this is important for later. So a random Tuesday morning, I'm still recovering from last night's shift when I get a phone call from one of the morning employees. She can barely get a word out in utter shock, but I made out that she was saying, "They just fired GM." I let out this maniacal laugh that I'm sure my entire neighborhood heard. I laughed to the point of crying, so apparently the store was doing so badly that it caught corporate's attention. They sent a couple of guys to do an audit, and get this. They pointed out every violation that I had previously pointed out to the GM. It was so bad that they fired him on the spot. The corporate guys became our acting GM, and the store had to be shut down for a couple of days to fix the crapfest that it had become. Get this. Remember how GM said that I would one day come to the store as a customer and not an employee? Well, guess who ended up coming to order food a week after being fired? I almost snapped my ankle running to the front to serve him with a smirk. To make matters worse, his wife left him after he was fired. Apparently he was cheating on her with the morning shift manager. It all made sense now how she got away with anything. We only found out because she used his phone to text the workgroup chat, exposing the affair and telling us that this man had contracted an STD from the affair. It felt great to be validated and vindicated for everything I pointed out. Over the next couple of weeks, we went through a couple of GMs from neighboring stores who came to fill in. Eventually, things got way better. I left the job a few months later for health reasons and got a better job that paid twice what I was making back there. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.